The dining room of my Sacramento home was silent except for the steady voice of attorney David Armstrong as he read the words that would change everything. My daughter Lauren sat across from me, her manicured hands clutching her wine glass so tightly I thought it might shatter. All assets, including the Whitaker family home, are to be transferred upon my passing, not to Lauren Whitaker or Stephen Harris, but to the Golden Years Foundation for Abandoned Seniors. Her jaw dropped. Her face went pale. My once sweet child, who had called me mommy with tear-filled eyes at every scraped knee, now stared at me as if I had destroyed her world. "Mom," she whispered, her voice cracking, "how could you?" But all I could think was, how could she? Only 2 nights earlier, I had listened to a voice note she mistakenly sent me, mocking me as useless, laughing with her husband Stephen about how they would trick me, forge papers, and cut me out of my own will. My heart had raced as if every betrayal was a blade piercing me, and by dawn I had already packed my bags and headed straight to the lawyer's office. This dinner was the stage for justice, and as Lauren's painted lips trembled, I knew she was finally tasting the bitterness of her own cruelty. I was only 19 when I had Lauren. Her father, Michael, disappeared before she was even born, leaving me alone with a growing belly and a heart full of broken promises. My mother, bless her soul, sold her wedding ring to help me buy baby clothes. We lived in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment on the east side of Sacramento, the kind of place where the water sometimes ran cold and the heaters failed during winter. From the moment Lauren was born, with her rosy cheeks and wisps of golden hair, I worked 2 jobs, waiting tables at Denny's during the day and cleaning offices at night, just to keep food on our table. My mother watched Lauren while I worked, singing her old lullabies and telling her stories about our family's Irish roots. "Helen," my mother would say, "that child is going to be something special. I can see it in her eyes." And I believed her. Lauren was bright from the start, speaking in full sentences before her 2nd birthday, reading simple books by 4, and solving math problems meant for children twice her age by the time she entered kindergarten. Her teachers constantly praised her quick mind and creative thinking. Every penny I earned went to Lauren. When her classmates went on field trips to the Science Museum, I picked up extra shifts to make sure she could go too. When she needed a costume for the school play, I stayed up all night sewing it by hand. When she turned 16, I emptied my savings account to throw her a party at the local country club, the kind of celebration I could only have dreamed of at her age. "Mom, this is amazing," she had whispered, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the decorations, the cake, the small band playing in the corner. "How did you afford all this?" I had just smiled and kissed her forehead. "Don't worry about that, sweetheart. Today is your day." College was always the goal. I started a special savings account when Lauren was just 5, putting away whatever I could, sometimes just $5 a week. By her senior year of high school, when she was accepted to UC Berkeley with a partial scholarship, I was still short. Without hesitation, I sold my mother's jewelry, the only inheritance I had from her after she passed when Lauren was 12, and took out a second mortgage on the small house I had managed to buy when Lauren was in middle school. On graduation day, Lauren stood tall in her cap and gown, the California sun glinting off her blonde hair. I sat in the audience, tears streaming down my face, remembering all the nights I'd worked double shifts, all the dinners I'd skipped so she could have enough, all the dreams I'd put aside so hers could flourish. After the ceremony, she found me in the crowd and threw her arms around me. "Mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is as much yours as mine. I'll take care of you someday. I promise." I believed her. Every sacrifice felt worth it in that moment. Lauren landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm in San Francisco right after graduation. I was so proud watching her navigate the adult world with such confidence. She called me every day those first few months, telling me about her coworkers, her tiny apartment, the challenges of city living. Then she met Stephen Harris at a company event. Tall, with dark hair and the kind of smile that seemed calculated rather than genuine. He swept into her life like a whirlwind. Within 6 months, they were engaged. "Mom, he's amazing," Lauren gushed over the phone. "His family owns property all over Northern California. You should see their vacation home in Napa." I tried to be happy for her, but something about Stephen made me uneasy. Perhaps it was the way his eyes never quite met mine when we spoke, or how he'd check his watch whenever I talked about Lauren's childhood. Their wedding was lavish, far beyond what I could contribute. Stephen's parents paid for most of it, a fact his mother, Evelyn mentioned several times during the reception. Helen, she said, sipping champagne, her diamond bracelet catching the light. It must be such a relief that Lauren found someone who can give her the life you never could. I swallowed the hurt and smiled. I'm just happy she's happy. After the wedding, things changed. The daily calls became weekly, then monthly. When I visited their sleek condo in San Francisco, I felt out of place among their modern furniture and expensive art. Lauren would introduce me to their friends with a quick, "This is my mom," before moving on to more interesting topics. Stephen's career took off, and soon they were looking at houses in Sacramento. "To be closer to you, Mom," Lauren had said. They bought a sprawling home in East Sacramento, just 20 minutes from my modest house. For a while, things improved. Sunday dinners became a tradition. Lauren would bring expensive wine, and Stephen would talk about investments and property values. I would cook the same comfort food I had made for Lauren throughout her childhood. Pot roast, homemade bread, apple pie, and for a few hours, it felt like family. Then my arthritis worsened. The doctor bills piled up, and I had to cut back my hours at the elementary school where I worked as an administrative assistant. One Sunday, I mentioned my concerns about making my mortgage payment. "Mom," Lauren said, exchanging a look with Stephen, "don't you think this house is too big for you now? Maybe it's time to consider other options." "What options?" I asked. Stephen leaned forward, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. "We have plenty of room at our place. You could sell this house, use the money for your medical bills, and move into our guest suite." The offer hung in the air. Part of me was touched, but another part, a part that had learned to listen to instinct after raising a child alone, felt a warning tingle up my spine. "That's very kind," I said carefully, "but I love my home. I've built a life here." Lauren's smile tightened. "Just think about it, Mom. It would be easier for everyone." As I cleared the dishes that night, I overheard Stephen in the living room, his voice low but clear. "She'll come around. The property values in this neighborhood are skyrocketing. We'd be fools not to get our hands on it before she has to sell anyway." I dropped a plate, the crash drawing their attention. When I looked up, Lauren was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Embarrassment, guilt, annoyance. Whatever it was, it marked the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it yet. 3 months after that Sunday dinner, a pipe burst in Lauren and Stephen's master bathroom, flooding half their house. The contractor's estimated repairs would take at least 6 weeks. "Mom," Lauren said over the phone, her voice syrupy sweet, "we're in a bind. Could we possibly stay with you while the house is being fixed? It would just be temporary." Despite the unease I'd been feeling, I couldn't say no. After all, this was my daughter, the child I'd sacrificed everything for. "Of course, sweetheart. You know you're always welcome here." They arrived the next day with more luggage than seemed necessary for a temporary stay. Stephen carried in box after box of their belongings, rearranging my living room furniture to make space for their things. "Hope you don't mind," he said, not meeting my eyes. "We need to set up a home office. I've got some important deals in the works." Within days, my home no longer felt like mine. Lauren reorganized my kitchen without asking, moving dishes and cookware to different cabinets and drawers. "It's more efficient this way, Mom," she explained when I couldn't find my coffee mugs one morning. Stephen took over the dining room, spreading papers across the table I'd saved years to buy. When I mentioned needing the space for dinner, he looked annoyed. "We can eat in the kitchen," he said dismissively. "I'm working on something important." One afternoon, I returned from grocery shopping to find 3 large garbage bags by the front door. "What's this?" I asked Lauren, who was scrolling through her phone in the living room. "Oh, I went through your closet," she said casually. "Most of those clothes were outdated or too big for you now. I called a donation center to pick them up tomorrow." I opened one of the bags to find my favorite blue sweater, the one my mother had given me the Christmas before she died, stuffed inside like trash. "Lauren, you had no right to—" "Mom," she interrupted, finally looking up from her phone. "I'm just trying to help. This place is so cluttered. Don't you want to live in a nice, organized home?" The temporary stay stretched from weeks into months. Every time I asked about their house repairs, there was a new complication. The contractors had found mold. The custom materials were back-ordered. The permits were delayed. Meanwhile, my mail began disappearing. Bills, bank statements, insurance documents. I'd see them in the mailbox one day, and they'd be gone the next. When I mentioned it to Stephen, he shrugged. "I'll keep an eye out," he promised, but his tone suggested it wasn't a priority. One evening, Lauren's cousin, Rachel Flores, came to dinner. I hadn't seen Rachel in years, not since Lauren's wedding. She worked at the county clerk's office and spent most of the evening in hushed conversation with Lauren and Stephen in the living room while I cleaned up in the kitchen. As I brought in coffee, I caught a glimpse of papers spread across the coffee table, papers with my name on them. When they saw me, Stephen quickly gathered everything into a folder. "What's that?" I asked, setting down the tray. "Just some routine updates," Lauren said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Rachel's helping us organize some paperwork." Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Something felt wrong. Deeply wrong. I crept downstairs to the dining room where Stephen had been working. His laptop was closed, but several folders lay beside it. Guilt battled with concern as I slipped one open. Inside were copies of my deed, my will, bank statements, documents I'd never given them. One paper caught my eye. A power of attorney form with what looked like my signature, though I had never signed such a document. My hands trembled as I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it and went back upstairs. The next morning, I called my bank, only to discover my account access had been changed. According to their records, I had added Lauren as a joint account holder, something I had never done. "There's paperwork on file, Mrs. Whitaker," the bank representative explained. "Signed and notarized last month." Fear coiled in my stomach like a cold snake. That night, I pretended to go to bed. Early, but sat awake, listening. Around midnight, I heard Lauren and Stephen in the kitchen below my bedroom. "Mom's getting more suspicious." Lauren's voice drifted up. "She asked about the mail again today." "Doesn't matter," Stephen replied. "Rachel's processing the deed transfer next week. Once the house is in our names, there's nothing she can do." I pressed my hand against my mouth to stifle a gasp. My own daughter was trying to steal my home. The home I'd worked decades to pay for, the home where I'd raised her. The next night, as I lay in bed trying to make sense of it all, my phone pinged with a notification. A voice message from Lauren. I pressed play, expecting perhaps an apology or explanation. Instead, what I heard shattered my world. "She's useless, Stephen," Lauren's voice, dripping with disdain. "Always hovering, always asking questions. I've already talked to Rachel about transferring the house papers. Mom won't even notice until it's too late. By the time we cut her out of the will, we'll finally be free of her." Stephen's laughter followed. "Your mother always was too trusting. Remember how she cried at our wedding? My baby girl is all grown up," he mimicked in a high voice. "If only she knew we've been planning this since then." "Well, she'll have plenty of time to cry in that retirement home we found," Lauren replied. "The cheap one in Stockton." The message ended. I played it again, needing to be sure I hadn't imagined those cruel words. But there they were, undeniable proof of my daughter's betrayal. I didn't sleep that night. By sunrise, I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a woman with a plan. The morning after hearing Lauren's voice note, I moved through the house like a ghost, avoiding my daughter and son-in-law as they ate breakfast in my kitchen. Stephen was on his phone, barely acknowledging me when I entered. Lauren looked up briefly. "Mom, we're thinking of repainting the living room next week. That yellow is so dated," she said, stirring her coffee. I nodded absently, pouring myself a cup. "Do whatever you think is best." Her eyebrows rose slightly at my easy agreement, but she quickly returned to her conversation with Stephen about some dinner party they were planning. In my house, with their friends, without inviting me. Once they left for work, I changed into my best navy suit, the one I'd bought for my mother's funeral years ago. I grabbed my passport, birth certificate, and the small lockbox where I kept my most important papers. Then I called a taxi to take me downtown. The offices of Armstrong and Associates occupied the 5th floor of a glass building on J Street. The receptionist looked up as I entered, taking in my determined expression. "May I help you? I need to see David Armstrong. It's urgent. Do you have an eye appointment?" "No," I admitted. "But please tell him it's Helen Whitaker. My late husband Michael was his client many years ago." 20 minutes later, I sat across from David Armstrong, a man in his 60s with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. I remembered him from Michael's funeral, how he'd pressed my hand and promised to help if I ever needed anything. "Helen," he said, warmly. "It's been what, 20 years? You look well." "Thank you, David. I wish I were here under better circumstances." His expression grew serious as I laid out everything. Lauren and Stephen moving in, the missing mail, the forged documents, and finally, the damning voice note, which I played for him from my phone. As Lauren's cruel words filled the office, David's face darkened. "This is serious, Helen. What they're attempting is fraud. What can I do? I asked, my voice steadier than I expected. David leaned forward. First, we secure your assets. We'll revise your will immediately, create a revocable trust, and file a complaint about the forged power of attorney. Then we contact the police. I shook my head. Not the police. Not yet. Helen, what they're doing is criminal. No, I said quietly. But she's still my daughter, the girl I raised. Before I involve the authorities, I want her to face what she's done. To me. Face to face. David studied me for a long moment. You want to confront them? Yes. But I need protection first. And evidence. Over the next several hours, David and his team worked quickly. I signed a new will that excluded Lauren and Stephen completely, transferring everything upon my death to the Golden Years Foundation, a charity supporting elderly people without family support. The irony wasn't lost on me. We filed paperwork with the county to block any property transfers without my notarized consent. David arranged for a forensic accountant to review my bank records and document any unauthorized transactions. By afternoon, I had legal protection, but my heart still felt like it had been carved from my chest. One more thing, I said as our meeting concluded. Lauren and Stephen have invited me to dinner at Giovanni's this Friday to discuss future arrangements. They don't know I've discovered their plans. David understood immediately. You want me there? Yes, with all the documentation. I want them to know they didn't succeed, that I'm not as easily discarded as they thought. As I left the building, the bright September sun felt harsh on my face. I checked into a small hotel downtown instead of returning home. I couldn't bear to sleep under the same roof as Lauren anymore, to pretend I hadn't heard her laugh about sending me to the cheap retirement home in Stockton. That night, in my quiet hotel room, I finally let myself cry. Not delicate tears, but gut-wrenching sobs that left me gasping. I cried for the little girl who once made me Mother's Day cards with glitter and heart stickers. I cried for the teenager who'd throw her arms around me after winning the science fair. I cried for the young woman who promised at her college graduation to take care of me someday. Most of all, I cried for myself, for the decades of sacrifice, the lonely nights, the dreams deferred, all for a daughter who saw me as nothing but a burden to be discarded. When the tears finally stopped, something had shifted inside me. The pain was still there, but beside it grew something new, a quiet strength, a determination I hadn't felt since those early days as a single mother, when the world seemed stacked against me. I picked up my phone and texted Lauren. Looking forward to dinner Friday. I have some important things to discuss too. Her reply came quickly. Great, Mom. Stephen and I have exciting news. See you at 7. I could almost hear the false sweetness in her voice, imagining what their exciting news might be. Perhaps that they'd generously offer to manage my finances, or that they'd found a nice, community for me to live in while they took over my house. Friday couldn't come soon enough. The next morning, I visited my bank in person, armed with letters from David. I spoke with the manager, explaining the situation without mentioning Lauren by name. We've had concerns about unusual activity on your account, Mrs. Whitaker, the manager admitted. The joint account holder has made several large withdrawals recently. My stomach clenched. How much? She showed me the records. Lauren had withdrawn over $15,000 in the past month, nearly half my savings. I'd like to freeze the account immediately, I said, sliding David's letter across the desk, and open a new one with enhanced security measures. By noon, my money was protected, though much of it was already gone. I wondered what Lauren had spent it on. Perhaps a down payment on another property, or that trip to Bali she and Stephen had been discussing at breakfast. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went to the salon, the same one where I'd taken Lauren for her prom updo, where we'd giggled together as the stylist transformed her into a princess. What can I do for you today? The young stylist asked. I looked at my reflection, the gray-streaked hair I usually colored myself from a box, the tired eyes, the slight stoop that had developed from years of hard work. Everything, I said. I want to look like myself again. 3 hours later, I barely recognized the woman in the mirror. My silver-streaked brown hair was now shaped into a sleek bob that framed my face. The stylist had applied subtle eye makeup that brightened my complexion and brought out the green in my eyes. I stood straighter, feeling a confidence I'd lost somewhere along the way. You look amazing, the stylist said, genuinely impressed. I feel amazing, I replied, and was surprised to find it was true. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparations. I met with David again to finalize our strategy for Friday's dinner. Visited a therapist David recommended, who helped me process my feelings and prepare emotionally for the confrontation. I even bought a new dress. Deep burgundy, fitted. Nothing like the loose, forgettable clothes Lauren always encouraged me to wear. Friday evening arrived with an unseasonable chill in the air. I took a taxi to Giovanni's, arriving 15 minutes early. David was already there, sitting at the bar with his briefcase beside him. He nodded when he saw me but didn't approach. We had agreed he would wait until I texted him to join our table. At precisely 7, Lauren and Stephen walked in. My daughter looked polished as always in a cream-colored blazer and designer jeans. Stephen wore the smug expression that had become his default. Neither recognized me at first. I saw the moment Lauren realized it was her mother sitting alone at the corner table. Her eyes widened. Her step faltered. "Mom," she said, approaching cautiously. "You look different." "Different good, I hope," I replied with a smile. Stephen's eyes darted around the restaurant as if searching for someone. "Is it just you? We thought maybe you'd bring a friend." "Oh, someone will be joining us later," I said casually. "Please sit down. Let's order some wine." Lauren seemed on edge, watching me carefully as I confidently ordered a bottle of Cabernet, not waiting for Stephen's approval as I usually would have. "So," I said once our glasses were filled, "you mentioned exciting news?" Lauren and Stephen exchanged glances. "Yes," Lauren began, reaching for my hand across the table. "Stephen and I have been thinking about your future, Mom. About what would be best for all of us." "How thoughtful," I said, taking a sip of wine. "I'm all ears." Stephen cleared his throat, leaning forward with what he probably thought was his most sincere expression. "Helen, we've noticed you've been struggling lately. The house is becoming too much for you to manage, and we're concerned about your safety living alone." "My safety?" I repeated, keeping my voice neutral. Lauren jumped in. "The stairs, Mom, your arthritis. And remember last month when you forgot to turn off the stove?" I did not remember any such incident, because it had never happened. "We found a wonderful community in Stockton," Stephen continued, pulling a glossy brochure from his jacket pocket. "Affordable, safe, and they have nurses on staff." I glanced at the brochure for Sunset Valley Retirement Home, the cheap one in Stockton, from Lauren's voice note. The photos showed sterile hallways and elderly residents with vacant smiles. The monthly fee listed was exactly what my Social Security check would cover, with nothing left over. "And what about my house?" I asked innocently. Lauren's smile tightened. "Well, that's the other part of our plan. We thought it would make sense for you to sell it. The market's so good right now, and the proceeds could supplement your retirement fund. Though with the current arrangement," Stephen added, "it would be a simple transfer into our names. Save on those pesky realtor fees." "Current arrangement?" I tilted my head, watching them squirm. Lauren reached into her purse and pulled out a folder. "We've been working on updating your will and estate planning, making sure everything's properly arranged for your care." As she spread the papers on the table, my forged will, power of attorney forms, property transfer documents, I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it, the moment of truth. "This all looks very official," I said, examining the papers. "When did I sign these?" "So." "Again? I seem to have forgotten." Stephen laughed nervously. "Last month, Helen, remember? Rachel came over and notarized everything." "Rachel," I repeated. "Your cousin who works at the county clerk's office." "Yes," Lauren said, a hint of impatience creeping into her voice. "Mom, are you sure you're feeling all right? These memory lapses are exactly why we're concerned." I took another sip of wine, then pulled out my phone. "Actually, I'm feeling clearer than I have in months. Clear enough to remember that I never signed these documents. Clear enough to record our conversations last week. Clear enough to save this." I pressed play on Lauren's voice note. The sound of her voice filled our small corner of the restaurant. "She's useless, Stephen. Mom won't even notice until it's too late. By the time we cut her out of the will, we'll finally be free of her." Lauren's face drained of color. Stephen's jaw clenched. "Mom," Lauren whispered, "I can explain." "Don't," I said quietly, raising my hand. "There's no explanation for this." I texted David, and within moments he approached our table, briefcase in hand. "Mr. and Mrs. Harris," he said formally. "I'm David Armstrong, Mrs. Whitaker's attorney." Stephen tried to regain control. "We don't need an attorney for a family discussion." "Oh, I think we do," David replied, sitting beside me. "Especially when the discussion involves multiple felonies, including fraud, elder abuse, and forgery." He opened his briefcase and began laying out documents. My new will, the forensic accountant's report showing Lauren's unauthorized withdrawals, the bank's statement about the falsified joint account, and a letter from the county recorder confirming the forged signatures on the property transfer documents. Mrs. Whitaker has generously decided not to press criminal charges at this time, David continued in his measured voice. However, she has taken steps to protect herself and her assets. Lauren started to cry, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Mom, please. You don't understand. I understand perfectly, I said, my voice steady despite the pain tearing through my chest. I understand that you saw me as nothing but an obstacle to your greed. I understand that all my sacrifices, all my love, meant nothing to you. Stephen's face hardened. You always were difficult, Helen. Playing the martyr, making Lauren feel guilty for having a life of her own. A life of her own? I repeated incredulously. Is that what you call plotting to steal my home and dump me in a cut-rate facility? Is that what you call draining my bank account behind my back? You wouldn't have used that money anyway, Lauren snapped, her tears suddenly dry. You never spend on yourself, never travel, never do anything. It was just sitting there. The cruelty of her words stunned me into momentary silence. David stepped in. Mrs. Whitaker has revised her will. Upon her passing, all assets will transfer to the Golden Years Foundation for Abandoned Seniors. Additionally, she's established a trust with me as executor to ensure no changes can be made under duress. Lauren's eyes widened in panic. You can't do that. I'm your only child. You stopped being my child the moment you decided I was disposable, I said softly. The moment you laughed about sending me away and taking everything I worked for. This is ridiculous, Stephen sputtered. We were trying to help you. David slid another document across the table. This is a formal request for you to vacate Mrs. Whitaker's property within 72 hours. After that, we'll be changing the locks and installing a security system. You're evicting us? Lauren gasped. Where are we supposed to go? Back to your house, I suggested. The one with the burst pipe that magically never got fixed. Lauren's face flushed. The renovations took longer than expected. There were no renovations, I said calmly. I called your insurance company yesterday. They have no record of any claim for water. Damage. Stephen stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. You'll regret this, Helen. Lauren is your only family. No, I replied, looking him directly in the eyes. She was my family. Now she's just someone I used to know. Lauren began sobbing again, this time with real desperation. Mom, please, we made a mistake. We can fix this. I looked at my daughter, this stranger, wearing my child's face, and felt a complex mix of grief, anger, and strangely, relief. The illusion was shattered, but at least now I could see clearly. Some mistakes can't be fixed, Lauren. Some betrayals cut too deep. I stood and gathered my purse. David collected his papers and stood beside me. 72 hours, he reminded them. Not a minute more. As we walked away, I heard Lauren call, after me, her voice breaking, Mom, please don't do this. I didn't look back. Outside, the night air felt cool against my flushed skin. David offered to call me a taxi, but I shook my head. I think I'll walk for a bit, I said. I need to clear my head. Are you sure you're all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice. I considered the question carefully. Was I all right? My daughter had betrayed me in the most fundamental way. My heart was broken. The future I'd imagined, grandchildren I would dote on, family holidays, someone to hold my hand in my final moments, was gone. And yet I was standing, breathing, free from illusions and false promises. No, I answered honestly. I'm not all right, but I will be. As I walked along the lamplit streets of downtown Sacramento, I felt as though I was shedding an old skin with each step, the skin of a woman who defined herself solely as a mother, who measured her worth by her child's approval, who accepted scraps of affection as if they were feasts. With each block, I became someone new, someone stronger, clearer, and finally, after all these years, someone who belonged to herself. The 3 days after the confrontation at Giovanni's passed in a blur. I stayed at a hotel downtown, unable to face returning home while Lauren and Stephen were still there. David offered his guest room, but I needed solitude, space to grieve, to rage, to begin healing. On the morning they were due to leave, David called. They're gone, he said. The security company just confirmed. Do you want me to meet you at the house? I took a deep breath. No. This is something I need to do alone. My taxi pulled up to the familiar white Colonial an hour later. The house looked the same from the outside. The blue shutters I'd painted myself 5 years ago, the rose bushes along the walkway, the porch swing where I used to rock Lauren to sleep on summer evenings. But as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I froze. The place had been ransacked. Not by thieves, but by my own daughter in a final act of spite. Picture frames lay shattered on the floor, family photos with Lauren's face cut out. My grandmother's china cabinet stood empty, the delicate teacups and saucers nowhere to be seen. The antique clock that had chimed in my home for 30 years was missing from the mantel. I moved through the rooms in silent horror. In my bedroom, dresser. Drawers hung open, emptied of the jewelry I'd inherited from my mother. Even my clothes had been disturbed. Expensive items missing, others thrown carelessly on the floor. In the kitchen, cabinets gaped open, my best cookware gone. On the refrigerator, held by a magnet, was a note in Lauren's handwriting. You should have taken the retirement home offer. Now you have nothing worth passing on. My legs gave way. I sank to the kitchen floor, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, and felt something inside me break completely. I don't know how long I sat there, minutes or hours, before I reached for my phone and called David. They took everything, I whispered when he answered. Everything of value. His voice was calm but tight with anger. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't touch anything. We're filing a police report. True to his word, David arrived with 2 police officers. They walked through the house, photographing the damage, taking notes, asking gentle questions I could barely focus enough to answer. Mrs. Whitaker, one officer said, do you have any idea what items were taken and their approximate value? I tried to think clearly through the fog of betrayal. My mother's jewelry, family heirlooms, the china that belonged to my grandmother, silverware, some electronics. I'll need time to make a complete list. After they left, promising to follow up, David sat with me at the kitchen table. Helen, I know this feels overwhelming, but there are steps we can take. We can file an insurance claim. We can press charges for theft. This doesn't erase the legal protections we put in place. I nodded numbly, staring at my hands. It's not about the things, David. It's what they represent. Memories, history, parts of myself I can never get back. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I know, but you still have the most important thing. Yourself, your dignity, your future. That night, after David left, I wandered through my violated home, touching empty spaces where cherished objects had once stood. In Lauren's old bedroom, the one room they hadn't disturbed, I found her high school yearbooks, childhood stuffed animals, the quilt my mother had made for her birth. I sat on her bed, opening the yearbook to her senior portrait. She was smiling broadly, blonde hair gleaming, the whole world ahead of her. Below her picture was the quote she'd chosen, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." When had her dreams become so ugly? When had the sweet girl who once brought me dandelion bouquets transformed into someone who could cut my face from family photos? Was it sudden, or had it happened slowly? A erosion so gradual I hadn't noticed until the foundation collapsed. Sleep eluded me that night. As dawn broke, I made a decision. I wouldn't let Lauren's final act of cruelty define my home or my life. I would reclaim every inch of this space, transform it into something new, something wholly mine. I started in the kitchen, scrubbing cabinets, reorganizing what remained, making a list of what needed replacing. In the living room, I gathered the broken frames, saving the photos that weren't damaged. The empty spaces on walls and shelves felt less like wounds and more like possibilities. For 2 weeks, I worked from sunrise until I was too exhausted to stand. I painted walls, rearranged furniture, planted new flowers in the garden. Friends from my neighborhood, people I'd neglected during Lauren and Stephen's occupation, came to help when they heard what happened. Marge from next door brought me a set of dishes from her own cabinet. I've been meaning to get new ones anyway, she insisted. Tom and Diane from across the street helped me install new locks and a security system. My book club arrived one Saturday with homemade curtains for the living room. "We're so sorry, Helen," said Judy, my oldest friend in the neighborhood. "We should have checked on you more when they moved in." Something felt off about the whole situation. I wouldn't have listened, I admitted. I wanted so badly to believe Lauren still cared. Slowly, the house began to feel like mine again. Different, but in some ways better. Without Lauren's constant criticism, I chose bold colors I'd always loved, but had been too timid to use. Without Stephen's domineering presence, I arranged furniture for comfort, rather than appearance. One morning, about a month after the confrontation, David called with unexpected news. "The police found some of your items," he said. "Lauren and Stephen tried to sell your mother's jewelry to a pawn shop in Roseville. The owner got suspicious and checked a database of reported stolen items." "Did they arrest them?" I asked, surprised by my own calm. "They were brought in for questioning. Lauren's claiming the items were gifts from you. The police want to know if you want to press charges." I closed my eyes, imagining Lauren in a police station, perhaps finally understanding the consequences of her actions. "Yes," I said after a long pause. "I want to press charges." David's silence conveyed his surprise. "Are you sure? She's still your daughter." "I'm sure," I replied. "She made her choice. Now she needs to face the results of that choice." Later that week, I received a package from the police. My mother's diamond earrings, her pearl necklace, and the sapphire ring my father had given her on their 20th anniversary. Holding them in my palm, I felt a connection to my past that Lauren couldn't sever, no matter how hard she tried. That evening, as I sat on my newly painted porch, wearing my mother's pearls and sipping tea, my neighbor Tom came over with his toolbox. "Thought I'd fix that loose step," he said, nodding toward the porch stairs. "Wouldn't want you to trip." "That's very kind," I said. "Would you like some iced tea?" As Tom worked and we chatted about neighborhood news, I realized something important. I wasn't alone. I had built connections in this community over decades. Connections Lauren had tried to isolate me from, but couldn't destroy. The criminal case against Lauren and Stephen moved slowly through the legal system. They hired an expensive attorney who filed motion after motion to delay proceedings. Meanwhile, I received increasingly desperate messages from Lauren, first angry, then pleading, then attempting to manipulate me with memories of her childhood. "Remember how you always said you'd love me unconditionally?" one text read. "I made a mistake, but I'm still your daughter." I didn't respond to any of them. David handled all communication, firmly maintaining the boundaries I'd established. 6 months after the confrontation, I was finally starting to feel whole again. My house was completely transformed, a reflection of my true self rather than the diminished version Lauren and Stephen had tried to create. I'd joined a support group for parents estranged from adult children, finding solace in shared experiences and healing. I even started volunteering at the Golden Years Foundation 3 afternoons a week, helping seniors without family support navigate medical appointments, housing issues, and the complex emotions of abandonment. Their resilience inspired me. Their gratitude warmed places in my heart I thought had gone cold. It was after one such volunteer session that I ran into Carol Wilson, Lauren's former high school English teacher, at the grocery store. "Helen!" she exclaimed, embracing me warmly. "It's been ages. How are you? How's Lauren?" I hesitated, uncertain how to answer. "I'm doing well," I said finally. "Lauren and I are estranged at the moment." Carol's face fell. "I'm so sorry to hear that. She was always such a bright student. I remember how proud you were at her graduation." "Yes," I said softly. "I was." We chatted for a few more minutes before Carol mentioned she was retiring at the end of the school year. 40 years of teaching," she said, with a laugh. "I'm ready for a new chapter." Her words echoed in my mind as I drove home. A new chapter. Wasn't that what I was creating for myself? Not just repairing what Lauren had broken, but building something entirely different. A life defined by my own choices, not by my identity as a mother. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I went into Lauren's old room, which I'd left untouched during all my renovations. I opened the closet and began carefully packing her remaining childhood mementos into storage boxes. The yearbooks, the stuffed animals, the swimming trophies. I wasn't erasing her existence from my home. I was simply making space for who I was now, who I was becoming. As I sealed the final box, I felt another piece of my heart heal. Not forgetting, but moving forward. The day of Lauren and Stephen's preliminary hearing arrived on a crisp autumn morning nearly 8 months after our confrontation at Giovanni's. David insisted on driving me to the courthouse, concerned about my nerves, but I felt strangely calm. "You don't have to do this," he reminded me as we parked. "The prosecutor can present the evidence without your testimony." "I know," I said, adjusting my navy blazer. "But I need to look them in the eye. I need them to see that I'm not broken." The courtroom was smaller than I expected, the wooden benches uncomfortable. I sat behind the prosecutor's table, watching the door where defendants entered. When it finally opened, my breath caught in my throat. Lauren looked terrible. Her usually perfect hair hung limp, her designer clothes replaced by a plain gray suit that seemed a size too large. Stephen followed, his former arrogance diminished, eyes darting nervously around the room until they landed on me. He quickly looked away. The charges were read aloud. Grand theft, elder abuse, forgery, fraud. Each word seemed to make Lauren shrink further into herself. When asked how they pled, Stephen's attorney immediately said, "Not guilty," while Lauren hesitated, her voice barely audible when she finally repeated the same. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Maureen Gonzalez, presented the evidence methodically. The forged documents, bank records, the voice recording, photos of my ransacked home. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand with my head high. "Mrs. Whitaker," Ms. Gonzalez began, "please tell the court about your relationship with the defendants." I looked directly at Lauren as I spoke. Lauren is my only child. I raised her alone after her father left before she was born. I worked multiple jobs to provide for her education and needs. Stephen is her husband of 5 years. "And when did you first become aware of their plan to defraud you?" I described finding the suspicious documents, hearing the voice note, the confrontation at Giovanni's, and coming home to find my possessions stolen. Throughout my testimony, Lauren kept her eyes down, but Stephen stared at me with undisguised hatred. When cross-examination began, Stephen's attorney tried to paint me as confused, possibly suffering from early dementia. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Whitaker, that you've been experiencing memory lapses? That you may have signed these documents and simply forgotten?" "No," I said firmly. "My memory is excellent. I never signed those papers, and I certainly never authorized anyone to empty my bank account or take my family heirlooms." The judge, an older woman with shrewd eyes, watched me carefully during my testimony. When I finished, she nodded slightly, as if confirming something, to herself. After I stepped down, Lauren's attorney requested a brief recess to speak with his client. When court resumed 15 minutes later, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. "Your Honor," Lauren's attorney announced, "my client wishes to change her plea to guilty on all charges." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Stephen turned to Lauren in shock, hissing something I couldn't hear. She ignored him, her eyes finally meeting mine across the room. The judge addressed Lauren directly. "Ms. Harris, are you making this decision freely and without coercion?" "Yes, Your Honor," Lauren replied, her voice stronger now. "And do you understand that by pleading guilty, you waive your right to a trial by jury?" "I do." The judge then set a date for sentencing and adjourned the proceedings. As Lauren was led away, she turned once more to look at me, her expression unreadable. Stephen, still protesting his innocence, was taken out through a different door. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Ms. Gonzalez, who made a brief statement about elder abuse and the importance of protecting vulnerable seniors. David shielded me from their questions, guiding me to his car. "Why do you think she changed her plea?" I asked as we drove away. David considered the question. "Sometimes people realize the evidence is too overwhelming, or perhaps she finally felt the weight of what she'd done. I wasn't sure I believed that Lauren felt genuine remorse, but her plea spared me months of court appearances and painful testimony. For that, at least, I was grateful." 2 weeks later, I received a letter from the county jail where Lauren was being held until sentencing. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Mom," it began, the handwriting I recognized from years of birthday cards and school notes. "I don't expect forgiveness, and I won't insult you by asking for it. What Stephen and I did was unforgivable. The truth is we were drowning in debt, gambling debts that Stephen kept hidden from everyone. When he suggested using your house and savings to pay them off, I should have refused immediately. Instead, I convinced myself that you owed me, that after all your sacrifices, it was finally my turn to take something for myself. It wasn't until I saw your face at Giovanni's that I realized what I'd become. And still, I was too proud, too scared to admit it. The lawyers say I'm looking at 2 to 5 years. Stephen will probably get more since he won't plead guilty. I'm not writing to ask you to attend my sentencing or to plead for leniency. I'm writing because, for the first time in years, I'm seeing clearly. The woman who raised me, who gave up everything for me, deserved better than a daughter who saw her as nothing but a resource to be drained. I am sorry, Mom, not because I got caught, but because I failed to be the person you raised me to be." The letter was signed simply, Lauren, not with the love she'd always used before. I read it 3 times, searching for manipulation, for hidden agenda, but found none. just the raw confession of a woman facing the consequences of her actions. I couldn't forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever. But something in me acknowledged her humanity, her capacity for reflection. I didn't attend Lauren's sentencing the following month, but David did. He reported that she received 3 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 18 months. Stephen, who maintained his innocence through a full trial, received 5 years. Their marriage, David added, was apparently ending. Lauren had filed for divorce from her jail cell. As winter gave way to spring, my life settled into new rhythms. I increased my volunteer hours at the Golden Years Foundation, finding purpose in helping others navigate the challenges of aging alone. I joined a community garden, planted tomatoes and zucchini, and shared the harvest with neighbors. I even started dating, cautiously, skeptically, a kind widower named Richard who taught piano at the senior center. On my 60th birthday, I threw myself a party, something I'd never done before. My house filled with friends, neighbors, colleagues from the foundation. As I blew out the candles on a cake Marge had baked, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for me, I realized that Lauren's betrayal, painful as it was, had freed me from a lifetime of giving without receiving, of measuring my worth by my daughter's approval. That night, after everyone had gone, I sat on my porch swing watching fireflies dance in the garden. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Happy birthday, Mom. I hope it was a good one. L." I didn't respond, but I didn't delete it either. Some wounds heal cleanly, leaving no trace. Others leave scars that fade but never disappear completely. My relationship with Lauren would always be the latter, a scar that marked a painful chapter in my life, but not the whole story. Not by a long shot. 18 months after Lauren's sentencing, on a bright spring morning, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "Helen Whitaker?" a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Speaking. Mrs. Whitaker, this is Warden Martinez. From Central California Women's Facility. I'm calling about your daughter, Lauren Harris." My heart stuttered. "Has something happened to her?" "No, ma'am. Lauren is eligible for parole next month. As part of the process, she's requested a supervised family reconciliation meeting. You're under no obligation to attend, but she was quite insistent that I call you personally." I sat down at my kitchen table, staring out at the garden where tulips were just beginning to bloom. "A reconciliation meeting?" "Yes. It's a structured session with a trained mediator present. Many inmates find it helpful for closure before release, whether or not ongoing contact is established." "I see," I said, though I wasn't sure I did. "Can I think about it?" "Of course. Please call this number when you've made your decision." After hanging up, I sat motionless for a long time, watching a hummingbird dart between the feeder Richard had hung for me and the flowering bushes along my fence. In 18 months, I'd received only 3 brief communications from Lauren: the birthday text, a Christmas card with no personal message, and a short note when my neighbor Tom died of a heart attack, news she'd apparently read in the Sacramento Bee online. I'd responded to none of them. That evening, I called David, who had become a close friend since the trial. "A reconciliation meeting," he repeated after I explained. "What are you thinking?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants nothing to do with it. Another part is, curious, I suppose." "Curious about what?" "About whether she's really changed. About what she wants from me. About whether I can sit across from her without falling apart." David was quiet for a moment. "Helen, you're the strongest person I know. Whatever you decide, you can handle it. But don't do it for her. Do it if it brings you closure." I spoke next with Dr. Levine, the therapist I'd been seeing since the betrayal. She asked thoughtful questions about my expectations, my boundaries, what I hoped to gain from such a meeting. "There's no right answer," she said gently. "But sometimes facing the source of our deepest pain can be liberating, as long as we go in with clear eyes and strong boundaries." A week later, I called Warden Martinez and agreed to the meeting. The Central California Women's Facility was a sprawling complex of beige buildings, surrounded by high fences topped with razor wire. I parked in the visitor's lot, my stomach churning with anxiety. Richard had offered to drive me, but this was something I needed to do alone. After signing in and passing through security, I was escorted to a small room with a table and 4 chairs. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes introduced herself as Dr. Reyes, the mediator. We spoke briefly about the format of the meeting and her role in facilitating discussion. "My job is not to push reconciliation," she explained, "but to ensure communication remains respectful and productive. You can end the session at any time." When Lauren was brought in, I barely recognized her. Gone was the polished appearance she'd always maintained. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her face free of makeup. She wore a blue prison uniform that hung loosely on her frame, but the most striking change was in her eyes. The entitled coldness I'd seen at Giovanni's had been replaced by something quieter, more thoughtful. "Hello, Mom," she said softly, taking the seat across from me. "Lauren," I acknowledged with a nod. Dr. Reyes began by establishing ground rules. No interrupting, no accusations, focusing on feelings rather than blame. Then she turned to Lauren. "Why did you request this meeting?" Lauren took a deep breath. "I wanted a chance to speak to my mother face to face, without lawyers or judges, to tell her that I've spent every day of the past 18 months coming to terms with what I did and why I did it." She looked directly at me. "The person who plotted to steal from you, who said those horrible things in that voice note, who ransacked your home, I don't recognize her anymore, but I have to own that she was me." "What changed?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Everything," she said simply. "When you're stripped of all privileges, all comforts, all distractions, you're left with nothing but time to face yourself. I've had to look at every choice I made, every justification, every lie I told myself." "And Stephen?" I couldn't help asking. A flash of pain crossed her face. "Our divorce was finalized 6 months ago. I haven't spoken to him since the trial. I found out he'd been gambling away our savings for years, mortgaging property his family didn't even own. The house we claimed had water damage. It was foreclosed on months before we moved in with you." I absorbed this information silently. It explained some things, but justified nothing. "I've been working with the prison psychologist," Lauren continued when I didn't speak, "trying to understand why I became someone who could hurt the person who gave me everything. I think I resented your sacrifices. Each one felt like a debt I could never repay, a standard I could never live up to." "I never asked for repayment," I said quietly. "I know. That almost made it worse. Your constant giving made me feel inadequate, unworthy. So instead of rising to your example, I decided to tear you down in my mind, to convince myself you were controlling, interfering, that you owed me." Dr. Reyes turned to me. "Helen, how does hearing this make you feel?" I considered the question carefully. "Sad, angry still, but also, I recognize the person you're describing. Not the woman who raised you with love, but the woman I became after you married Stephen. Someone desperate for your approval, your time, your affection. Someone who couldn't set boundaries because she was afraid of losing you. In a way, we both failed each other." Lauren's eyes filled with tears. "I know you can't forgive me. I wouldn't ask for that. But I wanted you to know that I understand now what I threw away. The kind of mother most people would give anything to have." "What happens when you're released?" I asked. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'll be on parole for 2 years. I've been accepted into a transitional housing program in Oakland. I've earned my GED here, and I'm planning to take community college courses in accounting." "Accounting?" A small smile touched her lips. "I'm good with numbers. Always was. Just used that skill for the wrong things." We talked for nearly an hour, carefully navigating the raw wounds of our shared past. I didn't offer forgiveness, but I did listen. And when the meeting ended, something had shifted. Not healed, but perhaps beginning to scar over in a way that would allow movement without constant pain. As we stood to leave, Lauren hesitated. "There's one more thing, Mom. Something I want to return to you." She nodded to the guard who handed her a small package. Lauren placed it on the table between us. "I managed to hide these when we took your things. I didn't sell them with the rest. I've kept them safe all this time." I opened the package slowly. Inside was my mother's wedding ring and the silver locket that had contained her photo, the pieces I'd mourned most deeply among all that was stolen. "Why?" I asked, running my finger over the familiar engravings. Because even at my worst, something in me couldn't bear to part with them. Maybe some small piece of the daughter you raised was still in there. Somewhere. She stepped back. "Goodbye, Mom. Thank you for coming." As the guard led her away, I called out, "Lauren?" She turned, hope flashing briefly across her face. "I wish you well," I said simply. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was the truth. Driving home from the prison, I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd set down a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The anger that had sustained me through the worst days after the betrayal had gradually transformed into something more complex. A sadness for what was lost, yes, but also a growing appreciation for what I'd found in its place. That evening, I sat on my porch with Richard, telling him about the meeting as the sun set over my garden. "Do you think you'll see her again?" he asked, his hand warm around mine. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Maybe someday. For now, it's enough to have spoken our truths." Richard nodded, understanding in his eyes. At 65, he had his own history of loss and reconciliation. A son who had struggled with addiction, years of estrangement, the slow rebuilding of trust. "Whatever you decide," he said, "I'm here." Those 3 words, so simple yet so profound, brought tears to my eyes. After a lifetime of being the one who was there for others, for Lauren, for my aging mother, for neighbors and friends, it was still startling to hear someone offer that gift to me. As spring melted into summer, I continued my volunteer work at the Golden Years Foundation with renewed purpose. My experience had given me unique insight into the pain of family estrangement, the particular grief of those who found themselves alone in their later years, not through death, but through broken relationships. I started a support group specifically for parents estranged from adult children, creating a space where people could share their stories without judgment. Some, like me, had experienced outright betrayal. Others had lost children to addiction, mental illness, or simple drifting apart. All carried the special heartache of an absence that friends and acquaintances often didn't know how to acknowledge. "There's no casserole brigade when your child cuts you off," one woman said at our first meeting. "No sympathy cards or funeral rituals, just silence and pitying looks if people find out." Together we found words for our experiences, strategies for moving forward, and most importantly, the knowledge that we weren't alone. In July, Richard asked me to move in with him. His craftsman bungalow in Land Park was smaller than my house, but filled with light and the music from his piano. After careful consideration, I accepted, deciding to rent my home rather than sell it. "Just in case," Richard said, understanding without me having to explain. Just in case Lauren needed a place to stay when she was released. Just in case someday there might be a path back to something like family. Not the same as before, that was impossible, but perhaps something new, built on honesty and respect rather than obligation and resentment. As I packed my belongings for the move, carefully wrapping my mother's wedding ring and locket to take with me, I realized that the greatest gift of the past 2 years had been the discovery of my own strength, not just to survive betrayal, but to thrive beyond it, to build a life rich with meaning, connection, and yes, even love, from the ashes of what was lost. I was no longer defined by being Lauren's mother. I was Helen Whitaker, volunteer, friend, partner, survivor. And that, I finally understood, was more than enough. 2 years passed in a rhythm of quiet contentment. Richard and I married in a simple ceremony in his backyard, surrounded by friends who had become family. My work with the Golden Years Foundation expanded to include advocacy at the state level for stronger elder protection laws. I testified before the California legislature about my experience, helping to pass what some newspapers called the Whitaker Act, strengthening penalties for elder financial abuse and providing resources for victims. I heard occasionally about Lauren through the parole system. She had completed her sentence, found work as a bookkeeper for a small manufacturing company in Oakland, and was taking night classes toward an accounting degree. She sent birthday and Christmas cards, always with brief, respectful notes, never pushing for more contact than I was willing to give. Then, on a crisp October morning, my phone rang with a Sacramento number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Whitaker?" a woman's voice asked. "This is Nurse Reynolds from Mercy General Hospital. We have a Lauren Harris here. You're listed as her emergency contact." My heart stuttered. What happened? She was in a car accident on I-80. Nothing life-threatening, a broken leg and some lacerations, but she'll need somewhere to recuperate after discharge. She asked me to call you, but said to tell you she understands if you can't help. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of the moment. This was a crossroads I hadn't expected to face so soon. Richard, sensing my distress, took my free hand in his. "Tell her I'm on my way," I said. Finally. As I gathered my purse and keys, Richard asked gently, "Are you sure about this, Helen?" "No," I admitted, "but I'm sure I need to see her." The hospital room was dim when I arrived, the afternoon sun blocked by half-drawn blinds. Lauren lay propped against pillows, her right leg in a cast, cuts on her face still red and raw. She looked small in the hospital bed, smaller than I remembered. "Mom," she said, eyes widening in surprise. "You came." Of course I came. I set my purse down and moved to the chair beside her bed. "What happened?" Delivery truck ran a red light, hit my side of the car. She gestured to her injuries. Could have been much worse. An awkward silence fell between us. 2 years of minimal contact creating a chasm neither of us quite knew how to bridge. Thank you for coming, Lauren said finally. The nurse said they'll discharge me tomorrow, but I can't manage the stairs to my apartment with this cast. I was going to ask about short-term rehab facilities, but they're so expensive without better insurance. You can stay in your old room, I said, before I could second-guess myself. The house is rented out, but the tenant is moving. Next week. It's empty now. I couldn't ask you to— You didn't ask. I offered. I met her gaze steadily. It doesn't mean everything is fixed between us, Lauren. It just means you need help, and I'm in a position to provide it. Relief washed over her face. Thank you. The next day, Richard helped me bring Lauren home. Not to his house where we lived, but to my old house, which still contained some furniture and Lauren's childhood bedroom. We set up a temporary bed in the living room so she wouldn't have to navigate stairs, arranged for grocery delivery, and made sure she had everything she needed. I'll check on you tomorrow, I said as we prepared to leave. My number is on the fridge if you need anything before then. Lauren nodded, her eyes taking in the house. So different now from when she'd last seen it. The walls were painted in warm colors I'd chosen, the furnishings simpler but more comfortable. You've made it beautiful, she said softly. More like you. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I simply nodded and left. The next 6 weeks established a cautious routine. I visited daily, bringing meals, helping with practical needs, sitting sometimes in companionable silence as we both read or watched the evening news. Richard joined me occasionally, his natural warmth and lack of shared history making conversation easier. We carefully avoided difficult topics, sticking to neutral ground, books, current events, the hummingbirds that visited the feeder outside the window. But as Lauren's physical healing progressed, I sensed her gathering courage for something more. It came on a rainy afternoon as I helped her organize her medication. Mom, she said suddenly, I've been seeing a therapist since I got out. Every week, without fail. That's good, I said, unsure where this was leading. We talk a lot about you. About us. About the kind of relationship we might be able to have someday. She took a deep breath. I know I can never undo what I did, but I'm trying to understand it, to make sure I never become that person again. I sat down across from her. Why are you telling me this now? Because my leg is almost healed. Soon I'll go back to Oakland and we'll return to Christmas cards and distant politeness. And I'll be grateful for that. It's more than I deserve. But before I go, I want you to know that the work I'm doing isn't just for me. It's for you too. For the pain I caused you. Something shifted in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but perhaps its precursor. Recognition. Recognition of genuine effort, of the hard work of true change. I've been doing work too, I said quietly. With other parents who've lost relationships with their children, learning to build a life that isn't defined by that loss. Lauren nodded, eyes bright, with unshed tears. You've done it beautifully. Richard, your advocacy work, your friends, you've created something wonderful. Yes, I agreed. I have. We sat in silence for a moment, the sound of rain against the windows creating a cocoon around our tentative understanding. Lauren, I said finally, I can't go back to being the mother I was before. That woman doesn't exist anymore. Too much has happened. I know, she whispered. But perhaps we can build something new, something honest, something that acknowledges both our past and the people we are now. I met her gaze directly. I'm not promising quick or easy forgiveness. I'm not promising holidays and family photos right away. I'm just promising to try. A tear slipped down her cheek. That's more than I hoped for. The day. Lauren moved back to Oakland. I helped her pack the few belongings she'd accumulated during her convalescence. As she zipped her suitcase, she pulled out a small wrapped package. This is for you, she said, holding it out. Thank you doesn't begin to cover these weeks, but I wanted you to have this. I opened it to find a delicate silver frame containing a photograph I didn't recognize. Immediately. Then I realized. It was from my 60th birthday, a candid shot someone had taken of me laughing, surrounded by friends, my face alight with joy. Where did you get this? I asked. I found your neighborhood social media page. Someone had posted photos from the party. She hesitated. You looked so happy, so strong. I've kept it with me as a reminder of who you really are. Not the woman I tried to diminish, but the woman who refused to be broken. I traced the edge of the frame, unexpectedly moved. Thank you. As Richard drove Lauren to the train station, I stayed behind, needing space to process the complex emotions of the past 6 weeks. When he returned, he found me on the porch of my old house, the silver frame in my lap. You okay? He asked, sitting beside me. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how true it felt. I think I really am. That evening, as we drove back to our home, Richard asked, What happens now, with you and Lauren? I watched the familiar streets of Sacramento pass by, thinking about the long journey that had brought me here. From young single mother to betrayed parent to the woman I was now, a woman who had learned that the greatest act of love is sometimes setting others free, including yourself. We start small, I said. Phone calls, maybe visits occasionally. One step at a time, with clear boundaries and realistic expectations. Richard squeezed my hand. Sounds wise. It's not forgetting, I continued. It's choosing to build something new alongside the memory of what happened. Lauren needs to do the work of becoming someone trustworthy, and I need to do the work of learning to trust again. Not blindly, but carefully, with open eyes. 6 months later, on a bright spring day, much like the one when our world had first shattered, I sat in a coffee shop in downtown Sacramento, waiting. Lauren had come for the weekend, staying in a hotel nearby. This was our 3rd visit since her accident, each one a little longer, a little easier than the last. She arrived precisely on time, dressed simply but professionally, her confidence quieter now, more genuine than the brittle arrogance she'd once projected. I got the promotion, she said after ordering her coffee. Senior accountant, I'll be overseeing the company's fraud prevention protocols. I smiled at the irony. Congratulations. Your professors must be pleased with your progress. They are. I'll finish my degree next year. She stirred her coffee thoughtfully. I've been thinking about what comes next. There's an opening with an accounting firm here in Sacramento. I'm considering applying. My cup paused halfway to my lips. Here? She met my gaze steadily. If that would be okay. I'm not asking to move in with you and Richard, obviously. I'd find my own place. But being closer, it might make this rebuilding process easier. I considered her words carefully. 2 years ago, the thought of Lauren moving back to Sacramento would have filled me with dread. Now it produced a complex mix of caution and something almost like hope. I think, I said slowly, that could be a good next step, if it's what you truly want. It is, she said simply. Not to reclaim the past, but to build a better future. One where I can show you, through consistent actions over time, that I've changed. As we walked together along the river after coffee, Lauren pointed out a pair of ducks leading a line of ducklings through the water. Remember how you used to bring me here to feed the ducks when I was little? She asked. With the stale bread from, Martinelli's bakery. I nodded, the memory warming me despite everything that had happened since. You were so patient. I'd throw all the bread in one big handful and you never got frustrated. You just brought extra. I glanced at her profile, seeing for a moment both the eager child she had been and the chastened woman she had become. That's what mothers do, I said softly. They bring extra. We continued walking in comfortable silence, the spring sun warm on our shoulders. I didn't know what the future held for us, whether this tentative rebuilding would flourish or falter, whether trust once shattered could ever be fully restored. But I knew with certainty that whatever came next, I would face it with the same strength that had carried me through the darkest days. As we reached the end of the riverfront path, Lauren turned to me. Thank you, she said simply. Not just for today, but for being willing to try, for showing me what real strength looks like. I thought about the long journey that had brought us here, about betrayal and loss, about rebuilding and growth, about the complex, imperfect nature of healing. I thought about the woman I had become in the process, stronger, clearer, more wholly myself than I had ever been. You know, I said, watching a flock of geese take flight over the river, sometimes the things that break us open are the very things that set us free. Lauren nodded, understanding in her eyes. I'm beginning to see that. We turned toward home, not the same home we once shared, but the separate lives we were learning to connect across the bridge of our complicated history. It wasn't perfect, but it was honest. And in that honesty lay the seeds of something I had once thought impossible, not the blind devotion of the past, but a clear-eyed relationship built on truth, boundaries, and the courage to begin again. Blood may make us related, but love, real love, the kind that sees clearly and chooses wisely, is what makes us family. And sometimes the most powerful act of love is not clinging to what was, but opening to what might be.